get some input and then to kind of start going and delving in a little bit more. So at this time, Aaron, is there anything just other before we turn over to David?
No, I think that's a great overview, Mayor. So I appreciate that. And David, we're going to tag team. So David, myself, and Chris all have different sections, and excited to give you a preview.
Sounds good. So David, we'll now turn this, David Mortensen, our financial director.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. You have in front of you printouts, hard copies of the tentative budget as of a few minutes ago. They may still be warm, fresh off the printer. So as we're talking about some of these items, if you want to see more detail, it will be found in there. And then, as the mayor mentioned, we'll be having meetings with each of you individually to talk through all those details after you have some time to look at it and formulate some of your questions. So one of the pages, we started doing this last year and continued this year, is early on in the budget, page 4, I believe it is, there is an all funds summary. So this is a chart that shows each of the funds of the city, where we estimate fund balance being to begin the fiscal year. So this is beginning fiscal year FY26. So that would be July of 2025. So that's that far left column in the darker gray color is where we expect to start. And then the next column shows budgeted revenues. This includes if a fund is using a portion of its fund balance during the year to pay for expenditures. That amount is included in this total. The next column would be budgeted expenditures. One change to note, if you notice the title, last year the title of that one had in parentheses, excluding depreciation expense. We're doing something a little bit different in the budget this year because depreciation is confusing, and we're always answering the question, why are we budgeting for depreciation when it's not a cash expense? So we've reworded that in the budget this year. It's not depreciation expense. We're budgeting for saving for capital asset replacement. So essentially this is setting money aside in the enterprise funds to be used at a future date, a future year, for replacement of infrastructure or equipment, whatever capital assets we expect to wear down and need to be either replaced or repaired at that time. So that's a change you'll notice here, and then in the individual utility fund budget pages, the line item that used to say depreciation now says saving for capital asset replacement. Hopefully that's a little bit more clear. We're not budgeting for depreciation. We're budgeting to save money for future use. The white column, the fourth one from the left, is a net revenue total. So after taking the revenues and then subtracting out the expenditures, this is what we expect the net revenue for each of the funds to be as in the budget currently. You'll notice in the utility funds, those amounts are quite high, and that is because of that line item where we are saving future funds for future capital asset replacement or repair. And then the second to last column, use of prior year fund balance. This tells you of the fund balance that was existing in that dark gray column on the far left, how much of that are we proposing to use during the budget year in order to meet all of the expenditures that are being proposed. And then the final column on the right is the estimated ending fund balance, where we expect to be June 30th of 2026, if everything goes according to budget. All right, next slide, Jay. Thank you. So the first thing we want to dive into is just a high-level summary of revenues. I think if you click one more time. I forgot that these are piece by piece instead of just all showing up at once, so I apologize about that. So first with property tax, as we've talked about before, property taxes tends to be a little bit difficult to forecast, but we are forecasting an increase due to growth for the next fiscal year. It's hard to know the exact amount. We've kind of fluctuated between, I mean, some years are higher than others, but we've fluctuated between 3 to 5% in the last few years. So we're being conservative with this estimate of a 2% growth, but we are projecting that increase for property tax. Does that work? Yay. Give Jay a break if this works.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I kind of get hung up on this, but what do you base your projection on?
So one thing we've looked at this year is number of permits. So we've looked at we did a little bit of an analysis on the last few years and the permits that we've issued. And then it's just kind of looking at the projects that we have coming up and what we expect to be issuing for permits in this coming fiscal year.
But the property tax you'll collect at the end of this fiscal year, or at the end of this year, it's not fiscal year, but will be based on what homes were built 2 years ago, basically, right? Because there's always a lag of about a year.
There is a lag, yeah.
I mean, there's not a lag on the property, but on the building structure.
And if you look at the permits we've issued so far in calendar year 25, those are down quite a bit from where we've seen in prior years. So we've seen a slowdown in that growth.
But that won't affect our fiscal year 26 property tax, will it? Won't it affect the next year? I mean, if you're having less homes built in 25, you won't collect that tax from them until December 26. So it seems like it'd be based on 2 years ago. I don't know. I'm just curious how you figure that out. So makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, and we just put in a placeholder, and ultimately it's actually the tax commission will give us an estimate when we get much closer to the end, like middle of June, right, is their deadline to give us that. So maybe they'll give us a little bit more, based on what they're going to count, right, Scott? Because at this point, we're kind of just guesstimating what homes they're going to count, because we think it's all based on certificate of occupancy by a certain date, but ultimately it's them who get to determine that.
So maybe I just want to make sure I understood what you were just saying, Erin. So let's assume, I think on the June 20th, we'll get the certified tax rate. Mm-hmm. Do they give us an estimate of what we believe based off that certified tax rate, what we might collect?
Am I misunderstanding, David?
Yeah, they actually calculate the revenue first and then back into the rate. So they give, based on the valuation in the city for the year, they find the taxable value and then the revenue that, because as you remember, property taxes stay at the same level except for growth. Okay. So they do that formula to calculate the revenue first and then determine what the tax rate will be with that revenue.
Because the county will send stuff to us in July with the estimated property tax. That's when I get mine, July, August, I think. So they probably already know.
Yeah, so it's as of January 1st of this year, of 2025, they'll give us a certified rate in June, and they'll give an estimate of what they assessed on July 1st of 2025. And then we get our notices in July and August, and we can dispute if we don't agree or things that way, and then they're due at the end of November.
Yep. All right. As far as sales tax, we've projected just a flat amount. We're not proposing any type of an increase at this time. Shouldn't be a huge surprise to any of you with the uncertainty in the economy right now. We don't feel comfortable proposing any type of an increase. And we've seen just within the last few months, there's been a lot of up and down. We've seen like a month where there's a 20% increase from the same month the prior year, and then the next month is like a 25% decrease, and then a 20%. It's just kind of going up and down. But overall, we're not seeing the double-digit increases year over year that we used to see. We're closer to the 2% right now, and moving forward, don't feel comfortable with projecting a budget with any type of an increase. Interest income is another one that's a little bit tough to budget. It depends on where interest rates are, which is also affected by the economy and any changes that the Fed makes to rates. It's also affected by the fund balances that are held within our various funds. The method that we use this year for projecting interest income, to be conservative, I still feel like it's ultra conservative, but it's a reasonable amount to budget. Looking at the actual revenues mid-year for the current fiscal year and projecting just a little bit higher than that for the next year's revenue amounts.
What percentage are you taking? Are you taking like a 4%, a 3.5%? When you're saying interest income, what percentage are you taking on that? What are you estimating the interest rate to be that we get income on?
I don't try to estimate what the interest rate's going to be. Right now, it's around 5% on our PTIF.
That's what I say. So you're on the
but it's
P-
hard to know exactly what's going to happen with that. So we are conservative with our estimates just in case the
That's why my question. Okay, so you've been seeing 5%. What did you build in the budget? Was it
much
5%?
less than that. Yeah,
You don't remember the percentage?
we didn't use a specific percentage to do our projection.
You just took what we did last year and kind of moved it down.
Right. Yep. Oh, went too far. This is not liking me, Jay. Yeah, just go back to the building revenue. So building revenue, as mentioned, we're expecting a slight slowdown in building, and that will show up in our projections for impact fees and permit fees in the budget.
Can I ask what you mean by slight? Maybe Rob can. What's a slight reduction? 100, 10?
I'm trying to think of the building permit numbers I just sent you. Last couple of years, we were at like 180 a year, 200, but we're now in the like lower hundreds for the last year. So we're seeing a drop of, 50 to 80 permits per year is kind of what we're looking at.
And so
Those is kind of just round numbers, but we had a lot with Ridgeview, but we have about 100, I think, permits left to pull, more or less, for Ridgeview, but they're not coming in fast. They're getting their plats approved, but it's not like we're seeing the rush of permits like we saw with the townhome and other portions of Ridgeview.
Okay.
Speaking specifically of Ridgeview, we're now moving into the Ivory homes, which are more what they classify their state, versus where they were doing a lot of townhomes and things that way. So it's kind of moved into the different housing style.
All right, moving on to personnel that's currently built in the budget. We have a 3% overall increase. It's to be determined still how much of that would be a market and how much would be a merit. We each year go through an analysis using a software that's provided by a third party to help us analyze where the market is. So we're going through that process now, still to be determined where that's going to land. But we put a placeholder of 3% total increase for employees of the city. Also included in the budget is a one-time bonus for Tier 2. So URS has 2 tiers. Tier 1 employees are those hired before 2011. Tier 2 or after that. If you are Tier 2, a new requirement starting with last year was that you have to contribute a portion of your contribution rate. Last year that was 0.7%. This year it's increased slightly to 0.81%. So that is an additional amount that will come out of those employees' checks that didn't used to come out of their checks. Because of that, in last year's budget, the council approved a one-time bonus for those employees to match that 0.7%, essentially making them whole as if that wasn't happening for them. So we are proposing the same thing for this year, but with that slight increase of 0.81%. This is something that we hoped would be taken care of in the legislative session. There was a bill that would have allowed cities to directly pick up this contribution so that rather than having to compensate the employees after the fact, we could have just paid URS directly, picked up that gap like we do with public safety. But that bill did not pass in the legislature. So we are proposing this as another kind of Band-Aid solution for this year.
So just to verify, so we have Tier 2 are those who are newer employees, and Tier 1 are the longer term.
Correct.
And so what this is to try to help those Tier 2 employees catch up on it. But this is, the state is asking for the Tier 2 employees to do this contribution, and you've put it in the budget stating, well, the city would do that contribution. Or
Yeah,
they still need to do
so
that?
if you looked at the same rate 2 years ago, the city's rate would have been that much higher. But each year that they've said that the employee has to participate in the contribution, the employee has to pay the 0.7%. The city's portion of that rate decreased by 0.7%. So really that was, if we didn't make it up to the employees with a one-time bonus or some other method, it would have been a decrease to the city's cost and an increase out of the employees' pockets. So we felt it fair and reasonable to propose this kind of fix in the meantime. We're hoping that there will still be a possibility of legislation that will allow us to pick up that gap like we do for public safety, but just hasn't been able to get through the legislative process. And the total for this for Highland City is approximately $12,500.
On the changes in Social Security for municipal employees, that doesn't impact our budget at all. That's just their ability to draw it. It's not us paying it.
Yep. So the windfall elimination program, and I don't remember the name of the other one, but those being eliminated, it doesn't have any effect on our budget. It just when employees retire, if they have a state pension, they will qualify for their full Social Security benefit if they meet the 40 credits for Social Security.
That's a good change, by the way.
Yeah, it's great. Yep. All right. As far as medical benefits, we have a placeholder in the budget of a 10% increase. We are hopeful that that's not going to be that high, but we were warned by our benefits broker that other entities have been seeing increases that high. So we have that in there for now. We did hear from an entity just nearby that they saw more of a 7% increase. So we're crossing our fingers that that's what we're going to see. We actually have a meeting with our broker on Thursday morning to talk about renewal rates, and we'll update you with what that new rate will be.
How is that determined? I mean, are we held hostage by what they say it's going to be, or is it
We can push
negotiated,
back
or-
a bit. Yeah, we can negotiate. So our broker comes to us with the initial number that the medical insurance company brings to the table. We can push back and say, you know, that's not good enough for us.
Yeah.
And maybe they listen to us and negotiate it with us. Maybe they don't. But we always try to get a better rate and make sure that they're being honest with us. So.
Ron, what usually happens to the private sector, we just take a higher deductible. I mean, you know, if it comes in higher, here you're at 25, now you're at 5, now you're at 75, then you're at 10. I mean, it just, you try to control those costs the best you can.
Okay, shifting gears a little bit. In the budget, as mentioned in the all funds summary page, this is jumping all over, I apologize. There's a use of fund balance in many of the funds. So we just wanted to give a quick overview of what each of those is, kind of what they're being used for.
I think you skipped page 5 from our packet at least.
Oh, yep, it keeps skipping for me. Thank you. Okay, wow, now it's going back. Okay, it hates me, I apologize. Okay, I'm not gonna touch it again. Okay, so for the general fund, we're proposing the use of $80,000 in fund balance. This is for the this year's portion of the Alpine Highway fence reimbursement. Something that the council approved for a 3-year period. This would be year number 2. So that $80,000 would be from existing fund balance. Let's see if I can get the next thing without going too far. Nope. I think I'm just gonna go and take Jay's seat. Okay, apologize about that. Okay, much better. So using this $80,000 of fund balance would leave about $3.5 million in our general fund reserves. That's estimated to be about 26.4% of our total revenues. That would be 21.4% above the state minimum, which is 5%, and 8.6% below the state maximum of 35%. So of course, we'd like to be at 35% or as close as possible. If you remember, the calculation is based on the current year's revenues, so it fluctuates from year to year. There was a year where we had some grant revenues that made it so that to maintain that 35%, we needed a higher balance in the general fund reserves. So we did that. But then in the following year, we didn't have those same grant revenues. And so we had to transfer quite a bit of money, about $2 million out of the general fund into our capital projects funds to get to where we are now, about $4 million in reserves. which makes it harder to get back to that 35% if we're proposing to use fund balance for other things. So as it stands now, if everything happens according to what's in the budget, we would end fiscal year 26 with a 26.4% fund balance.
So we were planning to end fiscal year 25 right at the 35% mark, and we moved funds out, which suggests that we have significantly more revenue this year in fiscal year 26 than we did in 25. Just broad strokes, where's that coming from?
That's a great question that I'll have to analyze a little bit further. I don't know that it's necessarily that we have a huge amount of revenue increase, other than we have proposed to use fund balance for additional items that have brought that below the 35%.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it current year revenue or prior year revenue?
It's the current year revenues. Yeah.
So it's because we're spending down the fund balance.
Certainly it's a
that makes
combination
sense.
of both. There is an increase in the revenues, but it's not astronomical. So.
But fiscal year 24, I mean, we exceeded 35, and that's when you had to transfer. I mean, that was just last June, right? But I think the jump in some of the revenue was some of the grants and things that we got, plus a lot of building.
Yeah.
Because Andy got, I don't know, was there several millions? And they're in different funds, of course, but some of it was grant money.
So currently in the budget, we have a just over $12,000 surplus of net revenue in the general fund. Fund balance use in the cemetery fund. So the cemetery fund reimburses the general fund over time for infrastructure and property that the general fund paid for to start the cemetery. Whatever the surplus is in the cemetery fund for the prior year, that amount gets transferred to the general fund in the next year. So that amount for fiscal year 26 is estimated to be just over 100,000. Of course, that could change based on operations, revenues, and expenditures in the cemetery fund. Library fund, Donna presented in our last meeting about the library fund. Just to make the fund balance, unfortunately, there's not capital included in this. It's just to balance the fund and pay for the rest of the operational costs. We needed just over $3,000 of fund balance to cover. Similar story with the building development fund. This fund, we kind of expected that as building kind of ebbs and flows, increases and decreases at different periods, that there's going to be years where we add to the fund balance, and there may be years where we take from the fund balance in order to pay for all the operational costs. This is one of those years where we would be taking from the fund balance due to the permit revenues decrease that we were projecting. Parks Capital Improvement Fund, $271,000. This would help cover a portion of the debt service payment that we make on parks, and then also a portion of the bike park phase 2. Roads Capital Improvement Fund, that $70,000 of fund balance would be used for a portion of Highland Boulevard landscaping. And then the Building Capital Improvement Fund, $331,000 is to pay a portion of the debt service payment on our building bond. That amount is, so the reason we're doing that is because of the amounts that we transferred in fiscal year 24 from the general fund. We moved a large amount into the building fund to be used for debt service. Typically, we would transfer money during the year from the general fund to the building capital fund in order to pay the debt service payment. But since we already transferred money before this year, we don't need to do it this year, and we can just pay it from fund balance.
So the building bond, is it paid off in 27 or 28 fiscal year?
I always get confused of which one's which. I know one's 27 and one's 28. I don't remember which is which.
I think the building's 27. We'd have to look into that. Yeah. Okay.
Moving on to the utility funds, the sewer fund would be using $173,000 of fund balance to help pay for the CIPP lining project. Pressurized irrigation would be using just under $500,000 to help pay for the pump house project. Storm sewer would be using just over $450,000 for multiple things, including new sumps, drainage project, a 10050 flooding project, vac trailer with boom, and some trucks that will be split with the other utilities. And then culinary water would be using just under $53,000 for tank roof project and those trucks that were mentioned.
So the vac truck underneath the sewer fund, that's assuming that we hire the 2 temporaries to go use that vac truck. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's kind of a combined deal. We would do 2 part-time operators and then a vac trailer. So it's not a truck, but a smaller trailer that could be pulled behind a smaller truck that not everybody, you don't have to have a CDL to drive, and some more employees would be able to take it around.
On the Highland Boulevard roundabout, is that out a few years? That money that we got for that, when is that going to show up?
You want me to answer that? We just need to get the construction costs from the developer once we have those, and we submit that information to MAG. And I think there's a couple things that I've already talked to them about. We've got a checklist that we have, but I think as soon as we have all that information available to give to them, we should be able to get that reimbursed.
Okay.
Now, let me ask Chris, who is building the roundabout? Is Highland City or is DR Horton?
DR Horton.
Okay, so DR Horton, and then we'll be reimbursing based off of their cost, right?
Correct.
But we have a grant, I think that's what you're saying with Mountain Land Association of Governments. We have a grant that will help reimburse some of those costs.
That's correct.
And then the 70,000 we saw earlier is for the medians inside Highland Boulevard. Okay.
DR Horton's not doing the medians? Okay.
No, some of the
thought that was a
medians they
split,
are. They're,
wasn't it?
So some of,
They're doing 50% and 50%.
Oh, but
cost share.
who's building the medians?
DR Horton is
Oh,
building.
they are?
them.
Okay, I'm sorry. You are
Okay.
right. And they're doing the Parkway detail along the Highland Boulevard on their development site.
all right. I think it's my turn. So one thing I should have mentioned at the beginning of this meeting. So traditionally, or last year, we gave you a budget memo that basically was the PowerPoint slides. And so to save myself some time, I just printed you out the PowerPoint slides. There's no budget memo. This is your budget memo this year. Okay, so now we're going to go through the council priorities. So what is in the budget? And this is all based on the rankings that you guys gave us at the budget retreat. So the top thing was an update to our trail maintenance plan, kind of just have a more systematic approach of what we're doing when and where we're going to go from there. So we have budgeted for that in the general fund. And in each of these, I've given you the GL. I won't read it for you, but you can find it in your packet there. So that's in parks and the general fund. The other top priority was to update our roads maintenance plan. Anytime you see an XX, and David's got a little star on this, it means that it's going to be a new GL number that we're still working on creating. But that is in our roads capital fund.
We've done a roads maintenance plan in the past. Why do we need a new GL number?
Usually it was because it didn't make sense where there wasn't a professional services or something like that.
I think we paid it out of a different
It was just an
account. And we're
generic
trying to be more
broader-
clear
okay.
about where it's coming. And this is the transportation utility fund.
Oh.
And it didn't have a professional services account
Okay.
yet, so we're going to create one.
Thanks.
Okay. Heritage Park power conduit. So this is to help us do events better in Heritage Park as well as Christmas lights. So in looking into this is actually going to be kind of a 2-phase project. Phase 1, we need to kind of get going on right away to be able to get ready for Fling, right? Because if we wait until July, we won't be ready in time for Fling. So phase 1, which will be coming to you soon, would be to get us ready for Fling, and then phase 2 to get us ready for Christmas lights is included in the budget as well in our Parks Capital Fund. Okay, next priority was the trail lighting at Highland Family Park. So we have included that in the Parks Capital budget as well. All right.
What does that entail? Actual lights or
The
just the
intention,
conduit?
so we've got most of the conduit run, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, so the intention is to put little ballers along the trail so that people can walk in the evening hours or
So
early
that
morning.
is the lights. Yeah,
Yes.
that's paying for the lights. Okay.
Yep, so it would be a little bit of money to make sure that we've got the big enough wire to get there, and then the lights themselves.
So the conduit is that we already have there, is it just for trail, or is it to light baseball fields, soccer eventually?
I think there's both.
What do we have
right,
in place?
I'm only aware of the conduit along the trail. I don't know what we have over
We
by
put
the
conduit in
fields.
for the baseball fields. It seems like we did not for soccer fields, though,
Yeah.
is my recollection.
No, I think you're right.
Okay, the next highest priority council gave us was a new work order system for Public Works. As Chris and his team were looking down that road trying to get bids, we realized that it might actually be okay with our current system. Might actually we just might be underutilizing it, and so right now we don't have anything funded in that because we want to make sure that we really do in fact need a new system. Okay, traffic calming toolbox. This is one that came up in the retreat as a top priority. And so we already had $75,000 in that line item. We've increased it another $25,000 for that. Cemetery veterans area. So if you remember, Stephanie presented on this and kind of showed you some examples. So we received a number of bids. Was it from Dalton's? Dalton's Memorial kind of put together some options for us. We have a placeholder right now of $18,000 in there, and that would be to do the bare minimum to get us started. I don't dare put any more in the budget right now. We're right in the middle of the fund study on the cemetery perpetual care fund, and so what we can afford to do will depend on where that study comes out, as well as one of the staff positions that we'll talk about here in just a second was a cemetery sexton. So depending on a couple of things. That number may go up if council would like to see more done there, but 18,000 is the minimum to get us started. Okay, and here it is. So there's 3 staff positions that staff recommended this year and council prioritized highly enough to make it into the budget. And so we're going to go into some high-level detail or some more detail with each of those staff positions in a minute. So I'm going to give you high level, and then I'll let Chris kind of give you some more in a little bit. But this one's a full-time position that would be split between the cemetery. Most of this individual's time would be spent in the cemetery as a sexton, and then the remainder would be doing building maintenance. And so a majority of that salary and benefits is coming from the cemetery care fund.
Oops. Question about the top item on
Yes.
that page, the Public Works
Mm-hmm.
system. I guess 2 questions about it. The first one is, how confident are we that the system we have, we're just underutilizing and we can figure out how to do it within there? And second of all, if that isn't the case, what's the rough dollar amount that we're looking at?
I'd say Chris, why don't you take that?
We've looked at dollar amounts anywhere from 14,000 up to 60,000, depending on what we need. I'm probably about 50% confident now that the software we have is capable of meeting our needs. Now I've gotten less confident as I've done a little bit of research, but I still haven't done like an actual trial on it to see how it would function the way we're trying to get it to function.
This is just my opinion. Certainly, other council members can reasonably have different opinions. Given that this was a high priority of ours, I would be more inclined to budget the money for it. And if it turns out we don't need it, then we can decide which of the lower priority things we're going to budget, rather than budgeting lower priority things and then coming back and deciding whether or not we can afford to do this down the road.
I agree with that, especially with the 50% that you're talking about now, and it's on a declining scale.
The good news is because it is spread amongst the utility systems, it's not a huge impact to any one fund, but that makes sense what you guys are saying, council. Okay, we will, depending on our meetings with you all, we'll probably add that back in. Okay, next we are on 10400 and 6000 West. This one's really tricky in that it's a very expensive undertaking. We all agree that it needs to be done, but it's a very expensive undertaking to make it happen. So at this point, we haven't not budgeted for it, but we haven't budgeted for it in that what we would really need to do at this point, because we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, is we would need to probably use our road maintenance money, what we were intending to use for this project. To improve the site, to get all of the right of way that we need to do and all of the construction there. like I said, though, we are trying to explore that and move forward with it. Chris had a meeting with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints recently to talk about the right-of-way in front of the Strasburg Church there and seeing if we could gain ownership of that. And so we are trying to move on this. We're looking for grants. I mean, we think this would be a great Safe Routes to School grant, but those take a long time to get. And so we're looking at all of the options here right now, but because of the price on this one, it's pretty cost prohibitive to do.
Is MAG an option for this kind of a project? It seems like it's safety.
I don't think they look at more, they don't look at pedestrian projects a whole lot. They would look at a trail projects, that's their best, but they like to look at regional connectivity, and I think this is more of a Safe Routes is really the pot of money that they have designated for children that would be more appropriate for this project.
Doesn't mean we're not going to do it. We're just going to kind of keep looking for funding options for it.
So is most of the money kind of in property acquisition or right away? I mean, the infrastructure is going to cost you some money, but I guess it'd be buying property.
So we're hoping that we can work out an agreement with the church where we're not buying or spending a significant amount of money for the property. I think Andy had actually looked at some costs for this, just doing curb and gutter along the side and then using some of our tailings from some of our road projects to build a sidewalk base with that. And I think the number just for that was about $300,000. Okay. We could probably double that if we are having to buy the property, though.
Was that just in front of the Strasburg Church?
That was actually along 6,000 West, along the west side of the park, to get it up to the north end of it.
So that's the question. Are you by the church or are you over by the baseball diamond park?
We are looking at the baseball diamond park.
That's why I didn't know we were. The church has parking along there, so I wasn't sure what we were thinking, curb and gutter. But you're talking over in what they call the Strasburg Park.
Yes.
It is owned by the church along that area. Would it be on both on 6,000 West and 10,400?
So that estimate that he had was just along 6,000, and I think the thought was that there is the sidewalk that is on the south side of the angled parking in front of the church. And so there is sidewalk connectivity that goes east to west along 10,400. So the thought was if we have something along 6,000, then we at least have something on one side of the street or the other.
It's just memory. I think at that intersection, there is not any curb and gutter at all. And I think there is no sidewalk if you want to say on the north end of the church. I don't believe there's sidewalk. There's parking there, and there's no sidewalk or gutter around that entire park. And I think what we had some residents come in or email us past that the concern was they had kids walking to Highland Elementary and that road. Now the problem is on if you want to say on the north side of the park, that's the junior high, so they don't really have a sidewalk, and that's why I thought we were trying to do is continue all that. I don't know. There's that whole area.
That whole area. And I mean, the one nice thing is if we could get public sidewalk in front of the Strasburg Church, it would be all along 10,400, right? Then you make it from 6,000 clear to the junior high, right? So that would be at least one piece of connectivity, but all in that area. I mean, depending on how far you want to go, this is a very, very big project.
Okay. This might be totally random thinking here, but if I had somebody come to me and my house didn't have a sidewalk because it wasn't required back when I built my house, but I definitely wanted a sidewalk, and the city came and said, hey, we're willing to help you put a sidewalk in front of your house. We'll pay half the cost. You pay half the cost. I mean, is that something that is optimistic or no? It just seems like everyone there would want a sidewalk in front of their house, and for the city to, because they didn't have to pay for it, then the city to come in and say, let's work together and put this in. I don't know. It would seem like they'd want to be able to give a little also.
I think we could certainly try to approach that with them.
You're telling me I'm way off, huh?
Well, I think that some people
That's a nice way of saying
would
it.
rather have the city pay for everything and not have to worry about it themselves.
But if they didn't realize that, I mean,
we'll put one in front of your house now that we know.
Put one in. I have a sidewalk. I paid for it. I don't know. Maybe just before like going in and saying, hey, we'll pay you for right of way, It's more like, hey, let's work together. This is something you want. Will increase your property value, make your house safer.
And that is the approach I've taken with the church so far, to
Okay.
to try to work with them and present it as a benefit for everyone involved. So
2 points about the sidewalk through that area. One, it was a reasonably high priority of ours, is a reasonably high priority of mine, but that doesn't, for me at least, mean that we need to get it all done this year, that we want to be making progress. Okay, actually 3 points. Second one, I would be disinclined to improve sidewalks here at the cost of spending all of our roads money on that.
I agree.
And third, that sidewalk between the parking and the church on the south side of the east side of the intersection, I would prefer for us not to be looking at that as a great option. It is not in the best of shape, as I personally know.
And you are an absolute trooper whenever I think about that instance, Councilmember Courtney.
There was something
The flaying.
Yeah, that's where I fell and broke my elbow.
And still lasted out the rest of the fling day
So there's bad
after a short doctor's visit. Okay. Sounds like this still is a high priority for council. We'll see if it makes sense to put in some phased amount of money here, and depending on how Chris's conversation goes with the church ultimately. And what they
Come back,
with.
Chris. Would this be something, when you're talking about safe routes to school, Highland Elementary is down 6,000 west, and you have Mountain Ridge down 10,400. What is the likelihood that we might be able to be successful in getting the safe routes to school here for funding or any other type of funding source?
I think it's reasonable, likely that it could happen. They're just usually about 2 years behind. So, and the next application cycle isn't until October. So we'd be almost 2.5 years before we would be ready to get.
We've been 40 years now, so.
Yeah.
It's surprising how fast 2.5 years will go.
Yeah.
It's true.
Okay. One additional priority. I'm sorry. Are we ready to go over 10,400? Okay. Moving on, the next priority that council ranked highly, and sorry, the numbers correlate to priority, right? And there's jumps because they tied, right? So now we're on to things that scored in the top 10. Was doing an additional playground replacement. So if you remember, we collect enough parks tax that we anticipate replacing 1 playground per year. This year, we're hoping to at least get started on 2. We actually recently got bids in for people to become kind of our preferred playground vendor. And so we're going to, I know Councilmember Rodella is going to help us go through those and choose one. So we're going to get started on doing 2 this year because we didn't spend the money last fiscal year. So typically, though, we have money to do 1 per year, but then this would allow us to do, again, 2 next budget year.
Do we have a maintenance plan and replacement plan for our playground equipment? I thought we did.
So last year, we started putting $70,000 away, is my recollection, from the general fund to Parks Capital Fund for replacement.
So what are the 2 that are next up to be replaced?
So Heritage Park and Mitchell Hollow are the 2 this year that we are planning on doing. I couldn't tell you what next year's playground is.
Okay.
Okay. The next priority that council requested us to look at was an events upgrade. This one's kind of tricky a little bit. So as we talk to our current or our events person at the time, unfortunately, she's no longer with the city, but she felt like she could do it within the budget that was allocated to do the quote unquote upgrade with the intent of not doing as many events, but kind of really focusing on the quality of events overall. And so we have not increased the budget with that intention in mind, is to focus on the quality and less on the quantity of the events that we do. Next was our document management software with our finance software we use for a lot of things in the city, but finance is one of the major things. And so the intention would, that is in there for $8,600, and it would be split between general fund and all of our utility funds. Questions on this page before we keep going?
I just have a question. Like, for example, software like this, Cassell, is that also used for Lone Peak District?
It is, yes.
So would that need to be paid for slightly out of there?
Do you anticipate using this software for Lone Peak as well? I guess with invoices we would, huh?
We would potentially, yes. We can look into
Doing that
whether
split.
that necessitates a payment back from them.
Good point. Okay. Any other questions on this page?
Aaron, I don't think you mentioned volunteer program, the very bottom one.
Oops, my apologies. Volunteer program. Chris talked to Josh about getting this program going again, and we had a pretty robust program prior to COVID. And we think, especially with the new personnel that was added last year, we don't think we need a budget increase for this. We just can kind of now dedicate some of that new personnel's time and some of the funding that was provided for that position towards getting a volunteer program up and going again. Okay, security cameras at the splash pad to help us with the individual, for a number of reasons, for all of the security reasons over at the splash pad. So that is also budgeted within Parks Capital to pull from there. This is the one that unfortunately we have to fund, that we don't really like funding, but we are seeing quite a bit of an increase to our irrigation assessments. Provo River water users is one of the major increasers there, and they're actually going to be coming to you in April. City Council is our intention to have them explain here's why the increases for this year. I'll say on the security cameras, so that is for the capital. That's not an ongoing cost there. That's the capital of putting in the cameras. Anyway, okay. Let's see.
Wait, I have a question for you. Sorry, on the security cameras, it's $75,000 to put security cameras in.
Cameras and then all of is it the wiring and everything, Chris?
And I believe that included some costs for lighting as well. Is that?
No, the lighting we decided we were going to just.
We didn't need. Mm-hmm. I guess it's just, for the system.
How many cameras?
I don't know what the specifics are on that.
I guess my question is, why can't you just do Ring cameras? I don't know, $100? That's what we all use on our properties, and they work great.
Wise cameras are $30, and they're like $9.99 a year for keeping record of it forever. I don't know. There are a lot of cheap options out there.
I know that this was probably the security system that we use over at Highland Family Park, that does the monitoring for us as well and alerts as well. But I'll look into the details exactly. I'll have the details of that bid for you when we meet together individually.
Does this include the monitoring that somebody's looking at those cameras, or how are they used? What information do we get notified?
At Highland Family Park, they do alerts. So we do have an active monitoring service right now, right? And right now we're using the temporary camera, but what we're switching over to is going to have a similar system where somebody is actually watching, and if they see people there, they can do an audio alert, basically to warn them to go away. And if they don't go away, then they call dispatch for us. Yeah. And then we get emails as staff that says, hey, we took care of this for you.
Okay.
But yes, let me get you the details on exactly what all of that $75,000 is. Okay. Okay. The next thing that council looked at as a priority was the culinary water line connections around the Longhorn property. Unfortunately, that one's not funded right now. As we've talked about for a little while, council, the water fund is one of those funds that is pretty tight in terms of days of cash on hand. and we didn't feel like we had we didn't have the money to do that and maintain a healthy fund balance there. So we are doing a water rate study right now to give you recommendations on any changes that we would recommend seeing there.
How was the Weir funded? What funding? Is there a debt we incurred with that?
No, actually, so the Weir, so that's actually, it's not Highland City who owns that, but we paid a portion of our assessments paid for that, but a majority of it actually came from a federal grant, like $7 million, I want to say.
Well,
Chris,
and
was
there's
from a
several
federal grant.
cities.
Yeah. Johns will be
Ernie
here.
John.
He'll be here tonight.
We can ask him.
You can ask him about the Weir and about the water stuff.
I've had residents of Cedar Hills complain about the unsightliness of the new Weir. It's up higher and it looks like a dam, and they want trees planted there to hide it. That's just some feedback.
Maybe they could have a fundraiser.
Yeah, it sounds like something they can help fundraise.
But I don't think Cedar Hills has to pay too much on that. It's Pleasant Grove, American Fork, Lehigh, and Highland, I thought. But I don't know. I don't think they're in it, so.
They just drive by it.
Well, they live up above it.
We can ask Mr. Johns when he comes in today about that.
That's a good idea. Tree replacement throughout the city also was one of the top scorers for the budget this year. And so rather than trying to contract this out this year, what staff did is add some additional money to purchase trees. And then the intention would be to use, again, that new parks employee to do the project.
We have about a half hour, just timing-wise.
Okay. Median landscaping. Okay, so along Highland Boulevard, again, we talked through this. So this is our estimated portion of what we are going to be spending on the median landscaping. The timing of this is a bit to be determined, right? We actually have a decent amount of money set aside in this budget year to do it, but that was before we knew we had a grant, and so that is one project, as happens with some of our capital projects, that is going to shift from one budget year to the next. We're just not quite sure on the timing of that yet, but we did put a placeholder in there. All right, the next one would be staffing for the parks and trail maintenance. So that was a recommendation or one of the top priorities council discussed. So staff ultimately, in talking internally, we did feel like it was best. So if you remember last budget year, you funded 2 new staff, but it took us until recently to get them both on board. And then unfortunately we've lost one recently. So we're back down and we need to hire somebody. So ultimately we're reluctant to add new staff when we need to get fully staffed at this point, and would like to see a full year with those new staff and to see, are we meeting council's expectations at that point, or do we still need to add more park staff? The next priority was an annual business event led by the mayor and city council. So what we did is there's an economic development line item. I just doubled that. So part of the chamber membership comes from that. And then the intention was to do some kind of a luncheon or something with the amount that we added in this year. Bike Park Phase 2. So this would be the capital. Just so you're aware, the Bike Park, the nonprofit group, has applied for a grant that the mayor and Josh and I helped them, and Chris helped them get together. And so they've applied for a bike grant to do Phase 2, but we put in $25,000 to help in that effort. Okay, water conservation education and program. We felt like as we talked through this that it made sense to not launch anything too quickly. So in terms of PI water conservation, so the hope is that we're going to start getting radio reads this year, right? The infrastructure is in place. We need to work out some kinks still, but really I think this first year will be the data gathering phase to see where are we at with water consumption amongst the city.
At what point can the residents see their water usage if they want to look?
I don't know how close we are to ready on that one, Chris.
We should be able to have that available once we turn on the PI system. We're starting
Are we still looking at April 15th?
We're still looking at April 15th, yes.
Any thoughts of delaying that? We have a wet fall here, or excuse me, winter,
Wet March.
March.
We never have, I don't think, unless we've
2
had
years ago we
concerns.
did. Yeah.
But that was more of a drought concern, wasn't it, at that time? So
Yes.
usually, even if we have water, we'll still pressurize the system and make it available and hope that residents, if they don't feel the need to water, that they won't.
Yeah.
To reiterate a point that I made at the general plan session when we talked about water, that I think if we're talking about water conservation and water awareness and we're only talking about PI, we are missing the boat.
To not also talk about culinary as well then?
Yes.
You're thinking? Yeah. Okay. All right. The next these next two are staff positions. So this one was a full-time meter technician to split between the PI and culinary water fund because come April 15th, we're going to have 4,500 more meters in the city to monitor. This one is a part-time storm drain maintenance staff to do cleanouts of the storm drains that really aren't happening. So it's actually 2 part-time employees because you need to properly do the work that we're intending for this position to do. But as the mayor pointed out earlier, this also comes with an equipment cost to it to purchase what's called a vac trailer to be able to properly do that work. We are looking at, and talking with the mayor, and we'll go into this, we are looking at other options for that, including do we do it with staff or do we do it through like a contract with a different company as well. But we do have some money budgeted there. The next one is long-term infrastructure study. And so this is to Councilmember Courtney's concerns about looking out longer than the 5 or so years that our current fund studies look out to see a long-term replacement.
Is there an amount associated with that?
So it's spread throughout the enterprise funds. We have a professional services line item in each of the enterprise funds, and the intention would be to take from each of those a little bit. And then replacing the entrance sign in Highland Glen Park. So we budgeted for that within our parks capital fund, excuse me.
Aaron, can I just?
Please.
I'm going to be real brief because I know you're running out of time here, but I was just talking about infrastructure study. I mean, we have a lot of projects that have been listed out that we need to do. It might be nice just to, as we go through the budgetary process, to kind of understand exactly what projects are coming. For example, we're raising the sewer fees, but we're projected at the end of fiscal year 26 to have 4.3 million in reserves. And, you know, as representatives of citizens, we have to be able to explain that. So it'd be nice to know what projects are coming up using that $4.3 million when we raise fees to, you know, and of course, I think some of the 4.3 comes from the raised fees, but at the same time, it's kind of nice to say, hey, we've got all these sewer projects we got to do. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, we can absolutely provide a copy of that for you.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to have to move fast. So Chris is going to take over and talk a little bit more about the employees and what exactly they would do.
So we've got the cemetery sexton building maintenance. As Aaron mentioned, 75% of that would be funded through the cemetery care fund, which gets revenues from plot and sales and burials. If you see the graph that we've got on the PowerPoint presentation, you can see that over the last 8 years, we've doubled, or a little bit more than doubled, how many burials we have per year. So we have seen a definite increase with this. And part of the thoughts beyond that is that it would help to improve how the cemetery is maintained. Right now, it's the mowing and a lot of the maintenance of the cemetery itself is through the Parks Department, but the sewer department takes care of the burials, so they're the ones that dig the plots up and bury the caskets after there. And it would be nice if that was a little bit more consolidated, just so that you're not trying to communicate with 2 different departments. So that's part of the thought on that. David? The building maintenance would be part of that as well. Buildings are starting to show some of their age. There's some minor wear that's going on that just kind of gets ignored, with the thought that we'll get to it when we get to it. And it never quite seems to be to that point. Concern that it may impact the public perception or may lead to longer terms down the road somewhere. At City Hall, we've got some nicks and scrapes on the wall. We've got some leaky faucets. There's some stuck blinds in the conference room behind us, discolored ceiling tiles, troubleshooting the security system, things like that, that we could really spend more time with. Fire department has issues with some light ballast, elevator maintenance, and other odds and ends. And police department as well has light ballasts that need to be replaced. Locker room maintenance, broken water fountains, roof fans, and other things like that.
So since he'd be working in the cemetery and the buildings, could he take care of the ghost in the library that we've been told about?
It just does seem very appropriate, doesn't it?
Okay, sorry.
I
This
think
would
Jay had a. Didn't you hear it? What would it sound like when you heard it?
It was frightening.
You don't. I thought you had a sound that you explained what the sound sounded like. Okay. Anyway.
So with that new position, we would free up additional time for either fleet, our fleet and facilities manager that's doing that work right now. Duties are split with them between the fleet and facilities. Would depend on the new hire exactly what their skill set was. Hopefully it's somebody that we could at least use for one or the other. It would allow our existing person to spend more time on preventive maintenance for our fleet system. And with the sewer department, it would allow our sewer department to spend more time to dedicate on some of our preventive maintenance, our routine inspections, checking lines with cameras, and using the vac truck for maintenance to clear out some of our lines and just free up some of that time that they currently don't always have. The water technician would be split between PI and water, and it would be a full-time position. It would be funded through the utility rates. The main duties would be installing new meters, troubleshooting and repairing problem meters. We are going from about 4,500 meters to 9,000 meters starting in April with the PI system coming on board. A big part of it would be managing the radio communications for meter reading to ensure that we get accurate readings and are collecting the appropriate revenue for our water and PI systems. And then we have the culinary MXU project coming in FY 2026. We have about 4,000 MXUs that will need to be replaced as they're coming to the end of their life expectancy. Either we would need to hire a contractor to install those as they need to be replaced, or it would be part of this position.
But what's a culinary meter MXU?
So the MXU is the communications device that they have for the meter. Right now, we have the older ones mostly. We do have some of the newer ones. The older ones we have to drive by to collect the readings for it, and we do that once a month. But the battery life on those are only about 20 years, so they're getting to the end of their life. And so last year the council did approve a pre-purchase of MXU so that we would have those and could replace those out as they start to die out, basically. And that would allow them to communicate with the new towers that were installed as part of the PI project, so that we would be able to collect the data remotely, and residents would also be able to see real-time usage, and they could identify leaks that they might possibly have, or it would also be a huge part of any conservation programs that we would have with the city.
And am I correctly understanding that if we hire this full-time position, that we expect we would not need to hire a contractor for those replacements?
That's
the
correct.
MXUs?
Yes. And then the other position that we have, actually two part-time sewer operators, storm sewer operators. Right now, storm is part of our streets department. We haven't done a great job of cleaning out sumps that we have. Sumps are part of our storm drainage system that we have. A sump, we've got a picture on the screen. You can see on the right there. We've got a clean out on that left side. Water would come in there, storm runoff, precipitation. It goes through the pipe and it goes into the sump there on the side. And the intent of the sump, it looks kind of like a manhole. They're 6 feet wide. Typically, they're about 9 feet deep. And you can see the holes that we have on those. Those are perforations in the concrete pipe that allows it to infiltrate out and percolate into the ground and eventually seep into the groundwater. I forgot we could draw with these, yeah. But there you go. So with time, those perforations get clogged with what the technical term is gunk, and they cease to operate as efficiently. This particular detail shows a 9-foot deep sump, but we have sumps as deep as 20 feet. So you can imagine just how difficult it could be to get in and try to clean that out. So we've included a vac trailer as part of this with a boom that would actually, even 20 feet, if you've got a 4-inch hose, that can be pretty heavy. That's a couple hundred pounds just of materials that you're using to clean that out. So, and we haven't done a great job. Without doing a great job, we start to lose the effectiveness of this, and which could potentially cause flooding, because if it doesn't have the ability to leach into the ground, eventually it's going to fill up and it's just going to flood the roads.
Yes, and we would prefer for our streets not to look like the Macy's parking lot.
Correct. Yes.
So we have a vac truck for the sewer, right?
We do have a vac truck for the sewer.
But you can't use the same vac truck. You have to have separate ones. Is that what you're saying?
Well, so the vac truck that we have for the sewer is a very specific vac truck that we don't feel functions very well for this use. We have a vac truck that we have for the water department that we could use, but it doesn't have a boom on it. So they would still be having to try to manually lift up the hosing. We got some costs to retrofit that existing vac truck that we have from the trailer, and when we got those costs, we actually realized it was more cost efficient to look at a vac trailer instead. It would be more expensive to retrofit our existing vac truck than to get a new vac trailer.
Are there contractors that will do this versus the city having to do the?
I do believe that I talked to our street superintendent about that, and there's a company called Twin D that I've used before to inspect sewer lines and storm drain lines, and they do a lot of inspections and cleaning. They do have vac trucks. So we think that they might be able to. That might be an option. We haven't talked to them directly, but I do believe that could be a possibility. And if the city council chose to go that route, I think that would be an option.
Okay.
All right. I think so. We went through all of the storm sewer high level. These next two slides just went through one at a time. The items that did not get put in the budget, and that was again just based on the rankings that came from the council
Can I comment on the PowerPoint before on that low ranking one?
Yes.
One more before, I think. Sorry. This bike park maintenance one and additional funding for maintenance of Highland family for the tractor for baseball fields. I think I ranked these higher, but I guess I want to say I'm kind of done with the days of putting in nice parks and then not buying the equipment or manpower to maintain them. If we can't do that, then let's not keep building parks and not maintaining. We had that issue at Mitchell Hollow with the baseball field, and then, nobody maintained it. We didn't have anybody nail dragging it, and then you have to put a lot more money into it to then fix it. So I think those are some items that we need to relook at just to make sure if we're putting in super nice things in our park, we need to have the equipment there, making sure we have a lawnmower in place to mow the big soccer fields there as well. So that's just my say.
I could not agree more.
I rank that one
Especially the
reasonably
bike
high
park.
also.
We've got somebody putting a lot of money into that. That's all donated and volunteer work that's being done. And for us to contribute just our fair share, we're spending $1 and getting $10 back. But we got to spend the $1 to maintain it and keep it.
Was this only for the ATV or tractor? Is that what the request is?
I'm thinking more of the bike park.
Well, this one, you need to maintain that baseball field, so you need some type of tractor or ATV with the nail dragger there. it has to happen.
How's the ATV at Mitchell Hollow? Is it taking care of the need of what's going
Yeah,
on there?
it's perfect.
'Cause
Yeah,
that's something you can maybe talk. There might be a donor out there that could help us with an ATV or something.
yeah.
An old ATV they could maybe donate.
But I agree, you need the equipment for maintenance. I agree 100%.
Okay. And that's part of what my one-on-one meetings will be with you guys over the next little bit is what do you want, what would you prefer to see pulled out and what is not in there that you think needs to be in there. So thank you for the initial feedback and we'll continue to take that from you. Okay, let's skip forward. Okay, two major questions that need to be answered as a part of this budget, in addition to what we just talked about, right? What's in that shouldn't be and what isn't in that should be. So beyond that, there's two major things. The first would be the library funding, as David alluded to, and we won't take a heavy look at it right now. From an operations standpoint, the library is a breaking point, and we feel like as staff, we've done everything we can without a change in policy direction from council. So at this point, we need you to tell us what you want to do long-term with the library funding, and we'll talk more about that in our council meeting. And then the second would be public safety fee. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a forewarning here. There is a significant request from public safety this year.
That's a surprise.
High level, the police department's request is mainly due to wages. Oh, wow. This is fun. The police department is mainly due to wages. The fire department is wages, an adjustment to some of the positions to make some of their current employees what we call engineers, which means they are in charge of the apparatus to make sure that it is functioning correctly. We're about to get a new, very expensive piece of apparatus, and we want to keep it in good condition, kind of similar to the maintenance conversation you guys were just having. And then the largest change to the budget is a request. So right now we have 8 firemen on shift at any one time. The request here is
scheduled on time.
I'm sorry?
Scheduled per shift.
Scheduled, thank you. We have 8, a staffing position for 8. However, due to vacations and things like that, 70% of the time we are not at 8, right? But due to sicknesses and vacations, we are at 7. And this, to be truly fully staffed, for a initial first response from either station in a fire incident, you need to have 10 total to get to 8. Because the magic number you actually need is 8. You need 4 at each station, right? But to get to 8, you actually need 10 because of vacations and sicknesses and things like that. What this is a staff is proposing a way to get us there slowly. The first would be to get up to 9, and then to write for a safer grant to get us to 10. But that is a large part of the increase from the fire department. Okay.
And
What that
just to be clear, the grant, if we receive that, would be a 3-year grant, after which time we'd have to pick up the...
Yes, let's be very transparent that it's not a forever grant, right? Long term, we would have to pick it up. If the board elects to move forward with this, it would be a pickup for the district eventually. Just helps it ease us into the cost. Okay, next slide looks at, do you remember, we looked at this table at our budget retreat. So the goal that council's given us is to keep 75% or less of our property tax and our sales tax going towards public safety, right? We already have the public safety fee, which all of that goes to public safety, but even after that, this most recent budgeted year, it's 74%. If the public safety budget is approved as status quo, it would take us to 83% of our property tax and sales tax would be used for public safety. So that means the rest of the general fund is run off of 17% of property and sales tax. David's going to tell you the really great options that you have. Again, if public safety request gets approved as to what you would need to do if you wanted to maintain that 75%.
I appreciate you giving me the most fun part to talk about, Aaron. Okay, next year I'm going to make sure that I look at animations on this presentation and just take them all out. I apologize for the one line at a time. So there's a couple of options that we could look at. As Aaron mentioned, if the full increase to public safety is approved, and we wanted to maintain that 75% of taxes used to pay our portion of the assessments, we would be looking at either a public safety fee increase or a property tax increase. If we looked at public safety, that would be about a $7.50 increase in the fee per month for each resident. So that equates to a 49% increase in the fee. This option, of course, each year there seems to be more doubt and questions about these types of fees in the legislature and whether or not we should be able to charge them. So that's just something to consider as we go through this discussion, is whether we want to maintain that risk of this fee changing someday or potentially not being allowed. Just some things to think about. Property tax, if we were to look at that, we would need a 38% increase in our property tax rate. Looking at the median home price in Highland of about $846,900, that would be about $121 increase per year in property taxes to make up this difference. And I think we missed it on the prior slide. The total amount of the assessment increase there would be $636,000. So that's the amount that we're trying to make up by proposing these potential solutions for revenue.
The public safety, what the proposal, if approved based off of what was presented by the different departments, was about 600 and some. How much? You had that number up there, was 600 and some thousand.
And my recollection was that something like 450 of that was the increase in staffing. Is that kind of in the ballpark of what people are remembering? Seems like it was 4 to 450.
I think it's a lot, but it's not that much.
Maybe 300. Okay. And probably a little lower than 300.
Okay.
One quick thing to note. We are not recommending, we are giving you those options and that information because you've said we want to keep that 75-25 rule. However, it does currently fit into our budget right now when we have net revenue, but so what that says is council hasn't allocated or hasn't prioritized other spending out of the general fund that's going to make us dip into fund balance, right? Other than the one-time Alpine Highway fence. So it technically fits into the budget as is, but do you really, I mean, that has been a problem down the road, right? If you ignore that in the long term, it's going to impact other things in the general fund that aren't getting the funding they need.
So, Aaron, let me ask a question. I'm not on the board, but this is for the board members for Lone Peak Safety. I thought they had some reserves.
They do. There's about $2 million in reserves. The requests for public safety this year are ongoing, and so we wouldn't recommend using it for reserves in the long term. We have talked to the board about if you want to use it in the short term to maybe pay off some of the leases, you could do that and buy you some time, but it won't be a source forever. Great news, I know.
One, not perhaps directly related to this, but dealing with the political questions from the state legislature. If we are considering an increase to our public safety fee or any other fee going forward, I think we should give serious consideration to going through the truth in taxation process on that. I think that if the legislature sees that we are doing that, then it's going to blunt.
Right. And you're absolutely right, but we do that every time. Every time we've increased the public safety fee, we've had several meetings. Yeah, we actually do more transparency than we do with one public hearing for property tax.
And we do have our Christian Chevier, which will be addressing at City Council some of this. It was HB 454 that's what we were hoping. We were actually hoping that would pass in a way to kind of help get some things clarified. It happened. We'll have Kristen, who's already here, maybe share a little bit about some input, what she saw there on that bill and things. We can maybe ask those questions as our state legislature.
But these fees have been up in the air for years, so, you know.
We thought we kind of had it put together, then there was other bills that came in competing against it. Okay.
So we're pretty much out of time, but just quickly, some potential changes still to come that we're still studying or analyzing: water rates, garbage rates, as well as the full garbage cost with the renewal from Waste Management. Cemetery fund study. We're in process with Science Public Finance on that study. That could have an impact on that Veterans Area project. There's a potential for that to increase if the funds are available and the council wants to go a little bit bigger there. Court expenses is something that we're currently studying to see how the court is functioning and how the two cities that participate are paying for those fees. So we'll bring further information about that. And then I already mentioned the budgeting for depreciation versus future infrastructure savings. There's a possibility that we could look at saving less in the budget in order to free up some of those funds for other projects if the council's comfortable with reducing that amount that we're showing currently as saving for future projects.
With the Justice Court, I thought it was just in this last year that we approved the interlocal agreement on that. Are we unhappy with things? Is Alpine unhappy with things? Or are we just looking at it as a matter of principle?
I think we're making sure that both sides understand how it's currently being billed and calculated to make sure that it's in line with the ILA that was just approved. And then I won't go through all of these, but this is the budget calendar, things coming up, including the individual council meetings, approval of the Lone Peak tentative budget coming in April, budget work sessions, open houses, other presentations, and then June 17th would be our final budget adoption date. And then this is just the list of things that we would be approving at the June 17th meeting, similar to last year. So nothing really surprising there.
I noticed there was nothing in there about the library request. That's going to be, it's not built in the budget.
A property tax increase or anything? No, it's not. So that is a long-term question we would like council to ask. If the budget is approved status quo in the library, they're dipping into fund balance about $4,000, so it's not dramatic this year. So right now we don't have anything budgeted there, though we certainly would not encourage council to ignore that for long. So
not only just dipping into it 4,000, we're dipping into the salary we're paying the director to offset the increase, which is so problematic. I mean, we're setting ourselves up for failure. When she leaves, we're not going to have the funds to hire somebody of equal quality to her, which we want to do. So I do think this has to be a high priority going forward.
So, okay, with that, anything else before we? Okay, right now it's 7:02. We're supposed to start our meeting at 7. How about we take 5 minutes and then plan to start at about 7:07? Well, let's just say 7:10. Okay.